1 second and we'll switch over to YouTube. Okay, all right. So today we are talking about Ethereum scaling solutions, which is always super exciting because it's something that we need to be working on as a community. And it's also something that can be somewhat confusing. So we're going to walk you through everything from why we need to have some scaling solutions in place to what some of the options are, and then focus mostly in on rollups. I'm Jessica Levesque, C4's Executive Director, and today we have Dustin from the CEP Committee and Carl from Scroll. So Dustin Lau, do you want to give a quick intro, and then we'll do an intro from Carl Leung.
Sure. My name is Dustin. I'm from the CEP Committee. That's the Certified Ethereum Professional course. And I'm also based in Singapore, and I also run a community called ETH65. So if you're coming to Singapore for Token 2049, hit me up, and we're organizing a climbing event there as well. So Carl, if you're going to be in Token 2049, let's catch up for sure.
For sure, mate.
Okay, and then Carl Leung from Scroll. Carl, do you want to just introduce yourself, say what you've been working on?
Sure. So first of all, thank you very much for inviting. And my name is Carl. I'm the APAC Growth and Partnership from Scroll. So technically, I'm not a super technical person. I'm more like an ecosystem person, but more than happy. And it's truly my pleasure here to talk about rollups and different solutions. Thanks again for the invite.
Yeah, thank you. And that's actually perfect, because what we want to do is introduce what this looks like and how, without going into super technical details. So why don't we just start by talking about why we are even meeting, why we need rollups or scaling solutions. And so the basic for it is that we want to increase transaction throughput, make sure that the transactions are going through quicker and we're not increasing gas fees, which is often happening. So basically it's about speeding up transactions and making sure that throughput is increased as well, and all while remaining decentralized and secure. What else should we add to the reasoning behind? I know that was pretty general, but do you have anything you want to add about why this is such an important project and why there are so many different options for scaling?
How do you want to take that?
Anyone?
Yeah, I can actually provide a very, very short answer. So faster, safer, cheaper. That's the ultimate goal, right? Because I think in the experience of using quite a lot of L1, there's actually quite a lot of problems start popping up. And people are looking for a lot of ways to fix it. So like, for example, Ethereum, right? If you're in the market like 2 to 3 years ago, when NFT is like still a thing, and a lot of people spend a lot of gas fee staying up in the midnight just to mint a JPEG file. It's looking back, it's actually pretty crazy, right? But problems start showing, right? You don't want to pay for like over $90 for a single transaction, and sometimes you have to pay higher gas fee just to successfully guarantee mint spot. So I guess like this is like Ethereum's like scalability issues started showing off, right? You just can't press a button and do the upgrade like easily as in other solutions. So that's why like a lot of ideas around L2s or like scalable solutions were introduced, right? And Vitalik actually wrote an article ages ago about different solutions. There's plasma, there's roll up, but eventually like his preference, the market's preference will be roll up.
Yeah, and just to add more color on that, I think, Jessica, you mentioned something about basically we want higher transaction throughput, but the other part about it, when you mentioned the gas fees also, is like it's also transaction capacity per block, right? So I think that when we are restricted to the amount that we can fit into a layer 1 block on Ethereum, there's always going to be that limitation there. And I think the idea behind rollups is basically if we can compress them off-chain, and then all we do is have a commitment to them on the L1, it allows us to invert the relationship between more transactions. If you have more transactions, eventually you end up having to pay higher fees, especially because they're competing over limited L1 block space. But if you have more transactions on a layer 2, it actually allows you to invert the relationship between the number of transactions and the fees, where the more transactions you have, and they are committed into an L1 block, you actually save fees the more transactions you have on the L2. So I think that's one aspect of it. And Carl mentioned the previous scaling approaches as well. So I think that before we get to the point of the rollup centric roadmap, before that, we actually, Ethereum actually explored a number of on-chain scaling solutions as well. They were looking at sharding, they were looking at increasing block
Let's talk a
size and
little bit
gas
about that,
limits.
Dustin, the sharding part. Like, I think we should go into detail because I remember thinking this is going to solve it. So
Yeah.
just circle back to it. Yeah.
Sure. I think I'll cover a few of those and then I'll get to sharding because sharding was one of the approaches that there was actually quite a lot of work on that. In fact, I saw a demonstrating of what the sharding would look like during, I think it was Token 2049 like 4 or 5 years ago or something like that. So on-chain scaling is one aspect. The other was state channels, and then there was plasma, and there are side chains as well, but side chains don't, inherit the security guarantees of Ethereum. And then there's sharding. So the sharding roadmap was essentially breaking the blockchain up into multiple shards, each handling a portion of the load. But the issue is that you can shard the network, but you have cross-shard communication, and that is a bottleneck between being able to shard the network and still maintain liveness and security. So the rollup-centric roadmap is essentially what we've come to. And there are also solutions that are kind of in between the two, like Plasma Cache and Validiums, which are part of the approach, but maybe without certain aspects. So without data availability for Validiums, for example. So those are the examples of some of the scaling solutions that have been tried. And then the rollup-centric roadmap has essentially meant there have been two major ways of doing it, which is optimistic rollups and zero-knowledge rollups.
So I feel like the takeaway from that is the Ethereum community really knows that we need to improve scaling. We need to scale. We need to improve scaling solutions. And it's been something that has been, I mean, it's pretty much been worked on since the inception of it. The founders knew that we would need to improve these things. And so it's been more about trying to figure out what is the best option. And I know there's some disagreement within the community around what the best option is, but basically it's just a lot of people coming together. And like Carl is at a blockchain conference and is here today because we're also excited about the fact that there are these new options. And I guess they're not even new anymore. They're just continuing to progress as we get more and more info and get further along the process. So yeah, I feel like that was a really good intro. Dustin, do you think we need any additional info on state channels or sharding or plasma, anything like that? Do we want to go into more or start with rollups? What do you think?
I feel like that dives into rabbit holes, and I feel like it's better to let people read those in long form because it's not something that necessarily works best in a spoken medium. So we'll probably leave links to some summaries of those approaches, and then we
Yeah.
just save the discussion for rollups.
That's a good idea. If someone asks me to explain plasma, I'm going to go down a lot of who knows where we'll end up, and it will probably be very confusing. So that makes sense to me. Okay, so we know why we need rollups. We've talked a little bit about other scaling solutions, but should we do a basic overview of the types of rollups? Carl, do you want to do that, or would you like me to jump in?
Feel free to drum in. I will just focus on the CK part, which is I feel more comfortable to talk about CK stuff today.
Fair
It's actually
enough.
the hill I will die on. Yeah.
Okay, so there are two different kinds of rollups that we focus on, and we are going to be talking a little bit about optimistic rollups and then also ZK or zero knowledge rollups. And they are different in terms of how the proofs work. So when we talk about optimistic rollups, we're talking about optimism, arbitrum. We're talking about this idea where we're able to take information to put it together and then roll it up and add it to the Ethereum network, add it to the block, add the transactions to a block. But the thing with optimism and arbitrum or optimistic rollups are that they're optimistic. There could be a 1 week period of questioning whether or not it's actually going to be finalized before it's added to the chain. So there's positives to it, but there's also negatives to it because of the waiting game. Dustin, do you want to explain in more detail how optimistic rollups work? I don't know that that was a great intro.
Sure. I think that the core principle behind optimistic rollups is that it is assumed that there are no invalid state transition. Invalid state transitions mean that we're assuming that transactions are valid and there aren't double spends in them. The issue with that is that when the optimism part means that you're assuming that no one has been a bad actor. Unfortunately, what you need to be able to prove that is fraud proofs. And that's one of the areas we'll cover later, which is L2Beat is a great site for tracking rollups, and they have something called a risk page, which is like what are the existing risks with rollups. Because rollups are somewhat nascent, they're getting bigger and they're getting more mature as we go along. But each rollup has certain measures of security, liveness, and aspects that they need to fulfill. And in the risk page of L2Beat, they cover very well what aspects of the rollups need to improve in. And for optimistic rollups, a lot of it is shipping fraud proofs so that, you know, a person that can prove that invalid transition happens gets rewarded. And that's the whole idea behind optimistic rollups, which is that the idea that there is a market of people that can prove fraud that get rewarded for it to show that all the transactions here are valid. On the other hand, ZK rollups work very differently. I think Carl can go into more detail for that.
Yeah, more than happy to add more details, right? So I think in different panels or conference, I often ask a couple of questions, right? So what is CK and what's the difference between CK and optimism room, right? So like I can try to explain it in a very layman language. So CK is like it's actually a zero knowledge proof. It's actually a cryptography term. So it's actually meaning that I can prove something which is valid without revealing that thing in detail as well. So a very quick example is like whenever you try to log in your like a Web2 email account, you often have to type like your username something at gmail.com and you have to type in your password. So if anyone's actually peeking your screen, your data is somehow exposed and revealed, or like it's actually revealed like if somebody is like monitoring the screen, right? So zero-knowledge proof actually bypass that. I don't have to look into the data itself, and I have to prove it is correct or not. So a very quick metaphor is I think you have heard of the book called like the Where's Wally, right? You know, it's actually a children's book, and everyone have to look for like that dedicated cartoon character in a book full of different characters, right? So imagine like three of us actually we are like in the same room staring at the same page of that book, and we are all trying to look for Wally, right? So what is the best way to prove that I actually spot Wally without ruining others' gaming experience, right? I shouldn't like shout and say, "Oh, here it is," and then it's somehow I just ruin everybody's experience, right? And the most sensible way is actually find a piece of paper, cut a hole, and when that paper fits that page, and that's exactly where Wally is, I can prove that I know where he is. But in the process, I didn't reveal the exact location, which is ruining the gaming experience of everyone else. So this is like it's not a super accurate metaphor, but to give you like a brief idea how CK works in some of the scenarios, right? So I think like when we speak about CK rollup, we have to speak about palladiums and volitions, right? So I think like the barrier of the two is actually getting blurred nowadays, right? But like if you really need to drill down to the definition of both of them, it's like data in palladiums are stored off chain, while CK rollup is stored on chain. And strong data off chain does allow for greater efficiency and lower costs, but it also leads to security concerns. While the data is stored off chains and the off chain managers can do as they like with it, like therefore, like a secret rollup is completely trustless, while Palladium requires some trust. But Volition is the other way around, right? So CK rollups have greater reliability and security in this scenario. So Volitions offer the choice to users whether they choose between storing the data off chain or on chain. So therefore, Volitions offer efficiency and lower cost of reliability and security to the users. But I think the barrier of both of them is getting blurred nowadays. So people are more tend to more like a hybrid method when it comes to like ZK rollups, right? So yeah, anything to add here, Dustin?
No, I think it's quite interesting that I've heard people talking about, essentially hybrid approaches where there are optimistic that like projects that are trying to combine both optimistic and ZK rollups. But I think another thing maybe we should clarify as well, that when we talk about ZK rollups, we're talking about using zero knowledge proofs in terms of using them to compress the size of transactions. And I know zero knowledge can tend to be meant to, a lot of people refer to it in terms of what it does for privacy preservation. But specifically in zero knowledge rollups, where they're being used specifically for their ability to compress transactions, and the privacy preservation is not something that is offered by all ZK rollups.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I don't think we talk about that much, that's like the other part of it. Carl, do you have more to add about that?
I'm all good. I totally agree. So I think like the privacy part is somehow like become like kind of I wouldn't say it's like not important, but it comes secondary when it comes to like the transaction speed, efficiency, or finality, right? It's often it's like it's not the first priority for most of these CK blockchains out there. So sometimes it got mentioned, sometimes it got highlighted, but sometimes when in the process of designing or like building a CK blockchain, so privacy comes in more like a secondary choices when it comes to like a security or like a efficiency. That's very true.
Yeah, thank you so much for adding to that. I think that it's important to recognize why we're using the tools we're using, and sometimes we have to focus on one thing over the other, and there's all kinds of different components related to this. So we've distinguished between the basics kind of optimistic rollups and zero knowledge rollups. Where do we want to go from here in terms of explaining more about it? We talked a little bit about security. Do we want to add anything else about that? Oh, you're muted, Dustin.
How do you have anything you want to add specifically about like security in terms of like, for example, in Scrolls ZK rollup implementation, who provides security, validators, things like that, or provers, for example?
Sure, but recently we just have a very interesting thing to share because not long ago we just introduced like researching a protocol to aggregate TDD proof from multiple TDD proofers with different hardware and client implementations, similar to like DVT for Ethereum validations. But in this case, we can actually combine the variable signature schemes into the TDD proof generation, so that TDD proof is like the attestation of our PE proofers. So minimizing the trust of a single hardware manufacturer to make it so I guess like it somehow actually enhance the security level a little bit. And for more like I think like generally CK like just a very personal view, right? But I think like generally CK rollup without considering the fraud proof period is actually more safer and fair for users in a lot of cases, right?
Oh, go ahead, Dustin.
Oh, I was going to ask a follow-up question, which is, do we also want to talk a little bit about Scroll as a ZK EVM? Because, as Vitalik mentioned early on, there are, 4 types of ZK EVMs, and Scroll is like closer to a type 1 in terms of EVM equivalence. Is that something that you think is relevant to cover here as well?
Sure. So actually, we have quite a lot of internal discussion around the different type of roll up and what is our final form we want to be. And I think like I mentioned, this actually Vitalik's actually a very great philosopher in the Ethereum world. He actually set a lot of definitions and defined quite a lot of terminologies out there. But I think like why this space is like very, very rapidly advanced, and I think the barrier of different types is actually getting blurred. So if we need to still use the definition of vitalic, we are like type 1, but we are heading towards type 2 for now, because I think by the end of the year, we're going to put more effort into decentralizing the frequencer and prover. And I also think that there's a lot of effort being put into making the multiple or like a parallel prover more mature and successful. And then I know that like since we mentioned like L2 beats earlier, there's like a couple of like a key security or like a risk metric we have to address, like the sequencer failure, which we'll cover later, and also the proposer failure, which we will need to cover later. That will be addressed in our later stage of update as well. So I think that we do want to put more effort into different aspects, but like technical capacity, we should focus on what we had right now, and they're like priorities for different stages of a tech upgrade.
Just to jump into what Dustin's showing right now on L2 beat, it's interesting. We can walk through this a little bit, but you can see the name we talked about, like Arbitrum. And then state validation says fraud proof. So since it says fraud proofs, we know that it's optimistic. Same thing with OP optimism. We know that that's fraud proofs. If we go down to where it says scroll, we can see under the type of state validation that they use ZK proofs, and the SN means, I'm assuming ZK snarks, right? Is the SN for snarks or something else? Not sure. Okay. Maybe you can't see the screen, but yeah, I think that it's SN is ZK snarks. Well, it must be because ZK proofs are using ZK snark for this.
Yeah. And Starknet has ZK's ST Starks. So yeah, it's probably
Starkware for Starknet. Okay, got it.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah,
Sorry.
so.
Don't you love when you're questioning something and then you answer your own question as you're deciding if you understand it? Okay. But so, yeah, I think this is a good representation of the fact that there are so many different organizations, companies, people working on the scaling solutions and trying to make things faster. What was the phrase you used? Faster, cheaper, safer? Something like that, Carl? I put it in the chat because I really liked it. Let's see. Faster, safer, cheaper. So you can see there's all of these different options. So we talked about the state validation, which we talked about fraud proofs versus zero knowledge proofs. I don't know if I would say versus, but those are the two things that are working. And then we can see whether or not the next column, data availability, whether or not the data is on chain or if it's held externally. And then do we want to talk about sequencers and proposers? And how that impacts funds? Or do we want to, well, actually first, why don't we talk about state validation? So I hinted at a little bit with fraud proofs versus zero knowledge proofs. Dustin, do you want to talk a little bit? I know you mentioned it before, but what do we mean when we're talking about fraud proofs, when we're talking about optimism versus then we can get into Carl talking a little bit about zero knowledge proofs for state, or a little bit more, I guess.
Sure. So what I'll do is maybe instead of going through it, what we'll do is we'll look at a summary from L2 Beats about like what's the stage of Arbitrum 1's fraud proofs, for example. So right now, the fraud proofs allow for 14 whitelisted actors to watch the chain to prove that the state is incorrect. Interactive proofs require multiple transactions over time to resolve. So there's a 6-day, 8-hour challenge period. So what this means is that fraud proofs are live on Arbitrum 1, but they are not open for everyone to challenge it. So then what you have is you have 14 whitelisted actors. So the trust factor you have there is you're trusting that these 14 actors are alert, they are competent, they are watching the state correctly, and they are challenging the state, and they cannot be bought by people who might want to do anything nefarious. The other aspect of it is that they're interactive proofs, which require multiple transactions over time to resolve. So even if you have 14 whitelisted actors, and let's say they're competent at everything, they're doing everything correctly, there's also an interactive proof element, which is if they can be if they can be taken off the network, for example, maybe they won't be able to interact to be able to put the fraud proof in. So that is another attack vector as well. And then there's the challenge period of 6 days and 8 hours. So the other aspect to it is you're trying to withdraw your funds. You have to wait 6 days, 8 hours in order to give the people executing fraud proofs that window of opportunity to be able to submit the fraud proofs. Because if you can withdraw it immediately, even if we have fraud proofs, we can't take the money back after it's been withdrawn. So that is an aspect to optimistic rollups where the challenge window is the delay for when you can get your funds out, just so that there's enough time for fraud proofs to be submitted, verified, especially if they're interactive.
Yeah, and I think calling them optimistic is just the perfect. Sometimes we name things and it's confusing, and I feel like naming it optimistic is like perfect, because you need to be optimistic. You also need to be patient, which has led many people into not wanting to do optimistic rollups. They would rather use zero knowledge, which, as we know, presents different problems. But do we want to do the other side now? Carl, will you go through and kind of go through what Dustin just did, but from a zero knowledge perspective, and focusing in particular on what Scroll is doing?
Sure. So again, not super technical expert, but just want to slightly introduce different CK proof out there. So I think the most two mainstream zero knowledge proofs is actually CK Snark and CK Stark, and these are like both of them are actually the both mainstream instrument for state correctness, but they also require like a certain level of setup to make it more like a trustless or reliable. And they're actually like another solution called Plonk, which is I'm not super familiar about, but like not gonna deep dive there. But this is like just a general overview of what is the popular or like a most chosen CK proofs out there. And I think that like I said, like for now, actually, the code base of everyone is actually not the same. Like I mentioned again, the barrier of like CK Snarks and CK Stocks is actually getting blurrier and blurrier, right? So some of the a lot of different layer 2 chains actually added their proofs just to suit their purpose of the chain, or like modify a little bit for different of their DApps, or like it really depends on what is the purpose of their chain, right? Like if your general purpose, probably you will tilt towards like CK Snark, CK Stock a little bit. If you're not, probably you will still tilt towards CK Snark a little bit. But I guess like everyone is mainly focusing on these two. So I wish I can share more about plants, but I don't really have the technical knowledge around it. So yeah.
That's fine. Something I wanted to touch on that we've talked about a little bit, but I think we should clarify, is when we talk about like minimizing trust, or that something is trustless. What we're talking about with zero knowledge in particular is that we're trusting in the math. So we don't need to trust somebody else or, be hopeful for the optimistic side. The trustless part is we're trusting in the computer code and trusting in the math. So we don't need to trust somebody else, which is what zero knowledge is all about. I don't know if there's anything you wanted to add to that, but I feel like that's an important thing to put out, because in our community, we often say trustless, but it's trustless between people, but trusted when we're talking about how the math works, right? Okay. So where do we go now? Let's see here. We've talked about the state validation, the differences a little bit. Dustin, do you have any follow-up questions that you wanted to check in on?
So I think that's what's useful is, I think you mentioned earlier that there will be some updates that Scroll is making to move forward on sequencer and proposer failure remediation. Is there anything you can share publicly, or is there anything that's on the roadmap that you can talk about with like what the next steps are for Scroll to move along the risk analysis page, so to speak, to turn more of those red things white, for example?
Yep, absolutely. So I think we can actually likely touch on the topic about like a sequencer failure and a proposer failure. So I think like to tackle sequencer failure, there's like a lot of solutions popping up. There's like self-sequencing or back to layer one have been introduced. And similarly for proposal failure, the mechanism like, the escape hatch or like a self-propose are available. But escape hatches and self-sequencing were not adequately prioritized in the design and implementation, for most of the cases out there. So there's actually some people who able to pull that off. There's some other chains in development of it. So we're actually looking into it, and hopefully further upgrades, we can address it properly. We're actually running quite a bit of stuff on our testnet. We treat it like a huge sandbox. And there are like different things that we want to enhance within this year or like a Q1 next year, right? So I think on the agenda, one of the things we really, really want to achieve is back to the previous topic is to become a very, very true type 2 layer 2s to fully able it to decentralize, have a proper government structure, to delegate, for users to able to run some proposals or propose some proposals or approve some of the proposals. And I think we are actually having quite a lot of pilot program with different partners to try to run the network in a decentralized method and decentralized provers on our testnet right now. So far the results are very, very positive, but I guess there's still a lot of optimization and fine tuning to do before we actually launch it officially. So I guess we will make further announcement around the end of the year, Q4 this year, so that hopefully at that stage everyone can see this scroll on a fully running and on a decentralized method. But back to the sequencer failure and proposal failure, and actually we do actually have that in our mind for quite a while, right? Because we always address security, and we don't want to we didn't really think it is actually vulnerable because we introduced multiple provers earlier. We think that enhancement of security is actually we think this is kind of strong for now, but security is like a thing which will never has a limit. You can never claim that we are the most secure, we are super invulnerable. What you can do in this space is you can only enforce yourself, make yourself more prepared for any potential vulnerabilities, and make the users feel comfortable in any other aspect. So I think that still around the Q4 we'll probably address how we deal with a sequence of failure. Will we introduce self-sequence? Will we delegate other decentralized sequencer network to come in space, or if there's any emergency mechanism to step in if we face a sequence of failure in some cases? And the same idea for the frequency of proposal failure as well.
Yeah, I think that's very interesting that you mentioned the multiple proposal thing, because I think that's one of the things that really differentiates Scroll from a lot of other projects, which is it is one of the things that you have indexed on and gone multiple provers is going to solve a problem, which is why you're tackling that before the other problems necessarily. Do you think you could shed some light on why Scroll thinks of having multiple provers as an important problem to tackle first, and what the thought process behind that is?
Because actually implementing another prover and run it parallelly is actually require quite a lot of technical resources. But if we pull that up successfully, it's actually unlock a lot of potential future upgrades in terms of protocol upgrade or in different aspect, right? So just a very, very quick example I can share, if we have another multiple provers and parallel provers, it's just adding another engine to a race car, right? If one touchwood fails, and the other one can make sure the network runs successfully. And having two engines can allow us to do quite a lot of testing and a potential upgrade. So since we introduced multiple provers, we have successfully pulled off two protocol upgrades. One of the most recent one, we call that Darwin. And two of the upgrades successfully significantly reduce our gas fee for at least 30 to 40%, and which is very, very remarkable in our sense, right? Because one of the common comparison metrics between Optimism Rollup and ZK Rollup is often the gas fee. So if we're able to make it more similar to the optimistic rollup level, that will give us a very, very competitive edge, and it will be easier for users and make them feel more comfortable whenever they make a transaction or not. So that's the engineers team put a lot of effort into pull that off, and we can proudly say that with the current multiple provers and parallel provers, we are more prepared and make it easier in terms of protocol scalability for future upgrades in different aspects. Like no matter which is about a gas fee optimization, no matter that's about shortening the finality, or no matter this is for security upgrades, prepare for sequence of failure, proposal failure, we are more confident to dealing with that. Yeah.
Oh, that's very interesting. So it's like multiple provers is kind of like Scroll's version of like client diversity within Scroll. So it's like multiple provers is unlocking all kinds of like market-based incentives for the different teams to keep improving and resulting in like an unlock for development within the Scroll ecosystem. That's quite interesting. I understand as well that there are some advantages that Scroll has for proving with regards to how it interacts with hardware. Is there anything that you can share publicly?
Yeah, we actually do have quite a lot of partners working on ASIC hardware to optimize the algorithm to run the CK network. So I think yes, I can share a little bit more. We're actually working with some of a lot of academic partners to pull off a lot of research resources on optimizing the ASIC or any other related algorithm to more successfully run a CK network. So I don't know if I can reveal more details yet, because there's a lot of stuff in the sandbox side, but we are actually preparing for a new product or a new solutions or recently we that's something I can share that we do have a key store solutions for a lot of institutions out there. This is actually more security solutions for them to store some of their key data. And we actually work with quite a lot of wallet partners for the key store solutions. So I think that in the previous narrative cycle, we talked about account abstraction a lot, right? So different wallets will have to break down the private key into different fragments. Maybe the users itself keeping one, maybe the wallet side keeping one, and the other you need at least in some mechanism. Let's say you have a free fragment and you need two of them to make the users accessible to the wallet, right? So we actually provide the key source solutions to a lot of wallet partners. We actually announced it in the SafeCon and working with quite a lot of wallet partners right now to become their key store for their last pieces of their private key fragment. So this is something a step towards to be more like a security and trustless effort for Scroll.
Oh, that's fascinating. The reason I asked about that was because I had spoken to a lot of hardware companies that previously ran Bitcoin miners, and they were concerned with the halving and profitability. So a number of companies that used to do hardware for Bitcoin mining are actually going into hardware to accelerate provers and verifiers as well. That's kind of the reason why I asked about that. I'm very interested in what you talked about in terms of Scroll helping to unlock native account abstraction. And I think that there is a general push towards account abstraction as something being easier for users. Is there anything else you can share to how Scroll envisions itself as a layer 2 environment for developers to build on? Because I think that we've gotten to the point where the Ethereum layer 1 has ossified, and layer 2s are kind of offering differentiation for people, either as a platform to build on or for users to use. If you have the same dApps across the layer 2s, what is it specific about Scroll that they're focused on in terms of maybe its developer experience, native account abstraction? What are the things that make it great for developers and make it great for users?
Oh yeah, that's actually my topic. There's actually quite a lot I can share about that. So we actually put a lot of effort to make sure that Scroll bring, no matter for developers and users, a great experience, right? So we understand, because like a lot of our team members got a very senior developers background. We know how painful it is to start from scratches to build a protocol, right? So let's say in the current stage, if I got a protocol running very smoothly on one EVM chain, and I need to redeploy it on any other EVM chain, the process could be very painful, right? I might have to redo the auditing. First of all, I might have to change a lot of a line of code, and I have to there's a lot of time consumed in the process of just to migrating or supporting another EVM network for my protocol. But Scroll is actually we got bytecode standard compatibility. So which means if you got a protocol which runs smoothly on any other EVM chain, all you got to do is copy and paste and redeploy it on Scroll. You don't need to change a line of code. You don't need to redo the auditing. Everything is smooth, because since day one, we actually put on quite a lot of effort not to talk to DF first, but we talk about infrastructure. We make sure that the infrastructure partners are ready since day one when we launch the mainnet, no matter on Nuxt, no matter RPC or Oracles. We make sure that they are in places before we launch the mainnet, right? So it's more we want to make all the tools handy and ready for the developers whenever what they're trying to build for Scroll. And I think we are very active on the developers front. You will always see us throwing hackathon around, no matter online or in real life. You will never miss us in any a ETH global event. We will always have a developer meetup or a minute hackathons throwing here and there. And we just have our first grants program wrap up. We call that Scroll Up. It's more like a rewarding mechanism or an encouraging mechanism for different builders out there. If they can bring in some innovative DApps or an interesting proposal to Scroll, and we are more than happy to provide a grant to support their building. And I think so far we've received over 1,000 different applicants from different teams around the globe. And
wow, that's awesome.
I think that yes, that's pretty amazing. And we're in the process of reviewing all these proposals, and we are start providing feedback from different developers or applicants for the final result. So I think we're pretty good. We can proudly say that we are actually a chain for developers, and we're super developer friendly. And for users, we understand that users got different demand or requests all the time. We got a very active Discord channel. We always have different moderators answering users' questions and listening to feedback, right? Because we previously received the feedback of the gas fee, because it's actually relatively a little bit too high while comparing to Optimistic Rollup, and that's why we have a couple of upgrade dedicated to solve the issue. So now, comparing to day one, our gas fee is at least 10 times cheaper since day one, and we got a very smooth transition experience for the users so far. And we are actively running quite a lot of on-chain campaign. We encourage the apps to do different on-chain campaign to encourage users to interact as well. Yeah.
Well, I'm very excited about all the innovation. My dog just started making little howling noises, so I think he's really excited too about this. It's cool when you talk about all the things going on and all of the developers that are interested in this, and how there's just such a momentum to make these changes and to work together. It's incredible. Sorry, Dustin, were you going to say something?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask about, this is more like something that's come up because I've been watching the core dev calls and everything. So one of the interesting discussions that have come up in all core devs is that there are some core developers from client teams that are pushing back against implementing Ethereum object format on the Ethereum L1. And one of the reasons that they're doing that is that they're why would we spend so much time implementing something like EOF for the L1 when we have a rollup-centric roadmap where we're telling people don't develop for the L1 anymore, build that on the L2. I'm not sure what Scroll's view of it is. I'm not sure whether it's something you can speak to, but what are Scroll's thoughts on the EVM staying exactly as it is, or not adding new features, or maybe even taking features away because the EVM L1 is no longer meant to be what you build dApps on. And if people are going to be building dApps on L2s instead, how should the EVM L1 think about things like Ethereum object format? Should we be removing features? Should we still be adding features? Because those are things that are still important for L2s. Where is the right place for that kind of development to take place?
Good question.
Yeah, that's actually a very, very great question. And I have actually seen the discussion have been flying around for quite a while, because like the positioning of different EVM layer 2s, and how do they, what is their competitive edge while comparing to thriving Solana ecosystem, or like a different high performance layer 1 which will be pop up in the future later. And I think like there's like a couple of super personal summary that I can make here, like aside from Scroll, right? So I think that Ethereum got its capacity limit, right? So that's why they turn to scalable solutions. And Solana itself got a high performance as a feature themselves, right? So scalability is actually actively embracing any other solutions that's trying to look for scalability to increase their arc for Solana, right? So, but generally for Ethereum layer 2, for the whole vertical, the infra is very, very mature. The infrastructure of everyone is actually very, very mature. You can even say that the development of infrastructure is way beyond the application market, right? We can all say that, right? The infrastructure is more than enough for the current application market, right? And recently there's a lot of discussion around blobs is not fully utilized, and you can actually explain and support this point of view. And I think like I think more importantly is like instead of looking for like a extra purpose of different L2 or L1s, I think that we should actually focusing on finding new application and use cases for them, right? Like in the previous cycle, we attract quite a lot of new users and from NFTs or like different other narrative. And I think that in this year, I don't think there's a lot of new narrative that can draw a lot of users. We thought a kind of attraction could be, but turns out it was not as large scale as we imagined. It turns out like remembering a seed phrase is not the pain point or like the barrier of adapting new users. So I think like instead of like comparing to other high performance L1, or like comparing to all the different chains like Solana, the EVM itself is actually more than enough to support different dApps out there. What we're gonna do is we're not gonna make our house bigger. Our house is big and good enough. We should find new and good residents, which is a good dApps, right? We should find a dApps which can enlarge, which can attract Web2 users. We should look for new dApps which is really, really innovative. We can perform very, very well in any other like EVM environment, because as I say, EVM environment have very, very good infrastructure. It's far beyond mature for now. So instead of like looking to make our house bigger, prettier, we should look for good residents that can live into it and perform very well. So that's my personal stance. Like in KBW as well, right? There's actually a lot of different new protocols, layer 1s have been popping up around different events. But I think that EVM structure is good. We got all the tools ready, man. We don't need more tools. We don't need more like solutions or SaaS to make the builders more comfortable. We need the builders to focus on build some great dApps that can actually shine in the EVM environment, right? Because I think that we got all the tools ready. We got all the infrastructure ready. So that's my take on this questions, right? I didn't answer the questions like directly, but like I actually observed quite a bit during the week of KBW, right? A lot of people, like, I think that people starting to realize like talking about infra is no longer the latest narrative. We need to look for like a killer app instead of a killer chain, right?
Yeah, I think that that's a narrative that's come up a lot, especially when you discuss with like people from Solana, for example, right? Solana's got a different set of trade-offs, but then one thing that, a lot of people observe is that they because they build less infra per se, because it's a monolithic L1, they're very focused on building user-facing apps. And then because there is so much in a certain sense VC investment around infrastructure, because if you're a VC, I'm betting on the whole of Ethereum, or I'm betting on this L2 onboarding all of the dApps that Ethereum already has, then it becomes an easier bet to make versus a bet on an individual dApp itself. So it almost feels like the investment meta supports building more infra on Ethereum. And it feels like for Solana, because there isn't a Solana L2 for them to invest in, they're like, a lot of dApps just end up focusing on users. And that's kind of like what some people say the divergence between Solana and Ethereum is, which is like Ethereum builds for builders and builds for infrastructure for other people to build on them, and then Solana focuses on users. I mean, what's your take of that thesis, or what people are discussing?
Um, I don't object this point of view. I respect this point of view quite a lot. So, but recently Solana have been, looking at the scalability point of view as well. Like, you know, instead of calling that layer two, so actually they are putting their hands on, making the infra more mature for builder as well. It's actually very, very funny. They call that, network scalability instead of using the word like network extension instead of calling that layer twos, right? But I think that like yeah, I do generally agree to that. Like Solana really got a thriving community comparing to Ethereum right now, because I think Ethereum's community is mostly this consists of quite a large portion of developers, right? But Solana, there's actually in retail users perspective, they actually do have a larger portion of retail users, and they are very, very adaptive to different kind of new fun stuff, right? I mean, like even if they perform slightly worse than the same product performs in any EVM or like environment, people will tend to use Solana because like of the community's effect, right? Because they have been, after all these years of activities, they have incubate a community which is driven by innovative product, adventurous product, right? Like look at all these different meme coins or like a different new social vibe apps on Solana, right? I mean, like or like a different meme coin launches up there. I mean, like who like this is like some kind of things that can perform way better within EVM's infrastructure, but people still gonna use it on Solana, right? Because like this is the nature of their community, right? They're more adventurous, they are more lively. Hate to say that, but they are more like curious about new stuff in the market. So yeah.
I feel one of the things that they have done is because, like, rather than trying to be EVM compatible and trying to slipstream off the existing pool of users, they've gone in a very different direction in terms of trade-offs. They don't even have a mempool, for example. They've made so many design choices that are so different that it's hard to say that they're just tagging on and trying to coast on EVM coattails. They're actually trying to build their own design space. And it's an experiment in a different direction, which is interesting to see because we start to integrate some of the things that they do, and they start to integrate some of the things that we do, like L2s.
Yes, I do agree. Yeah, I think like I'm really like looking forward to the DEF CON this year. Like usually DEF CON is the star Ethereum event every year. So usually like there's like a major announcement, there's like a new direction, or like there's a introduction of a new narrative, and usually this is like where all the EVM projects chains gather together to exchange ideas. Like I enjoy going to DEF CON like every year. Like last year it was in Istanbul. This year I think it's in Bangkok, right? So I actually very looking forward to it. Like we got new challenges here and there. We got new threat coming up, to challenge Ethereum developers' dominant position. And I'm really curious to see like what kind of innovative idea we can spark off when all the EVM layer twos sitting together, when all the like EVM major players on the same panel, what kind of stuff they can spark off. I think like I'm not feeling very desperate about the situation. I always believe that in this fast growing rapid space, competitiveness is always a key measure when we talk about like a technology advancement, right? Probably like we can see a better, greater, more competitive EVM in the future, like when they are threatened by some, major competitors in the space as well, like all the high performance layer ones, and Solana is looking for the network expansion. I think that like everyone is talking about EVM, you're gonna do something, but I do believe that you have actually got a plan in their mind, right? So I'm really my pleasure to be in this industry, to see different tech collab together, different ideas like started to clash together. And usually like the one who favors by the market will remain, right?
Yeah. I think the healthy competition piece is nice to note, because we started this conversation talking about how there are different types of scaling solutions, and the fact that there are different options with either chains or solutions to scale Ethereum. It just kind of, that competition creates more energy and more focus, and it really pushes us along as a community to keep making improvements. And I think we've seen over the course of this discussion that there is a lot going on in Ethereum trying to improve scalability. Dustin, did you have something else you wanted to add? I know we're actually over time, so if there's something else you wanted to say, and then we'll do a quick sum up. Go ahead.
No, I think we've covered everything we wanted to cover, and I think we've even gone beyond the scope and done a little bit about other things that Scroll is doing as well, which is quite interesting.
Yeah, this was great. Carl, thank you so much. We really appreciate you being here, especially when you're at Korean Blockchain Week, and I know you're in the middle of it, so we appreciate your time. Thank you. And Dustin?
It's my pleasure to be here. Thank you very much. And sorry, I'm not a super technical like developers. I do have some very simple coding background. Sorry, I can't drill too deep into a lot of technical questions.
No, sorry.
But
we didn't want that.
My pleasure to share a lot about the general view of the market and more about Scroll.
This was perfect. This is exactly what we wanted. We're not developers either. We wanted more of a high level, so this was perfect. And Dustin, as always, thank you so much. I always find the questions you have that pop up fascinating and super helpful for my own learning. So thank you both. Appreciate it. And for everyone watching, we'll talk to you next time. Thank you.
Thanks, Carl.